My husband said they were prosperity rituals, but those bottles he buried in our backyard during full moons concealed a secret that would change my life forever. Hello, my dears. My name is Evelyn. I'm 86 years old, and today I'm going to share a story I've kept secret for almost 50 years. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to leave a like, subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel, and comment where you're watching from. This is the first video I'm recording, and it would be wonderful to know I'm not talking to myself in this room. I was born in 1939 in a small town in Nebraska where everyone knew each other. Life was simple and predictable. I grew up believing that honesty and hard work were the pillars of a dignified life. My parents, humble people, made sacrifices so I could study and become a teacher. It was a tremendous source of pride for them to have a daughter who was a teacher. It was at the school where I taught that I met Edward in 1965. He showed up to enroll his nephew, or at least that's what he said at the time. Tall, well-dressed, with a smile that lit up the room, Edward stood out in that small town. He claimed to be a sales representative, traveling throughout the state. He had fascinating stories about places that I, a simple, small-town teacher, only knew from books. Our courtship was quick. Within 6 months we were engaged, and in 1966, at 27, I got married. People said I was lucky, an established man with a good job, respected. I believed I had found my Prince Charming, like in the stories I read to my students. The first years were like a dream. Edward was attentive, brought small gifts from his trips, and discussed books with me. Our first child, Richard, was born in 1967, and it seemed nothing could shake our happiness. When Laura arrived in 1970, our family felt complete. It was around 1968, almost 2 years after our wedding, when I first noticed something strange. That night I woke up startled. I'd always been a light sleeper, especially after Richard was born. I noticed Edward wasn't in bed. The clock read 2:17 a.m. I got up concerned, thinking he might be feeling ill. I called for him softly throughout the house, with no response. The back door was ajar, letting in a sliver of moonlight. I approached the kitchen window, and that's when I saw something that would be etched in my memory forever. In the backyard, under the silvery light of the full moon, Edward was crouched, carefully digging. He was wearing gloves, which I found strange for someone digging in the dirt at dawn. Beside him was a dark bottle. It looked like a wine bottle, but it was empty. I watched in silence as he finished digging a small hole, carefully placed the bottle inside, and then covered it with dirt, smoothing the surface as if to erase any trace. I quickly returned to bed, pretending to sleep when he returned. The next morning, while preparing coffee, I casually asked where he had gone during the night. Edward looked surprised for a moment, but soon smiled with that charm that had won me over. "You noticed? Forgive me for waking you, darling. It's just a family tradition, a ritual my grandfather taught me. It has to be done during the full moon to attract prosperity. The men in the family have been doing it for generations." He seemed so sincere that I didn't question further. That afternoon, I saw him plant a small rue seedling where he had buried the bottle. "To protect the ritual," he explained. I even found it endearing that this modern, sophisticated man was maintaining such a peculiar family tradition. During subsequent full moons, the ritual was repeated. Sometimes I pretended to sleep and watched him from the window. Other times I asked about the bottles the next day, always receiving varied explanations. "It's medicine for the soil. I bury coins to multiply our fortune. They're written prayers for family protection." The backyard gradually gained new plants: basil, rosemary, dill, each marking the location of a bottle. One night, about a year after the first time, I caught Edward in the living room preparing one of the bottles. There were papers inside that he was carefully folding before inserting into the bottle. When he saw me, he quickly put everything away. "What are those papers?" I asked curiously. "Just notes, names of clients who need luck in business," he replied, kissing my forehead. "It's better if you don't get involved in this, darling. My grandfather said the ritual loses its effect if women participate." That was Edward. He always had an answer for everything. And I, young and in love, accepted his explanations without questioning much. After all, he was a good husband and father, worked hard. Our children never wanted for anything, and if he had this small eccentricity of burying bottles in the backyard, well, who doesn't have their own quirks? During the following years, the bottle ritual became just another aspect of our family routine. With each full moon, another bottle was buried, another plant was added to our backyard. It was as if Edward were creating a secret garden, each plant marking a specific moment in our lives. I ended up finding it romantic, in its peculiar way. On one occasion, when Edward traveled for 2 weeks in 1970, curiosity got the better of me. Taking advantage of his absence, I decided to dig up one of the bottles just to see what it really contained. I chose the basil plant, one of the first he had planted. I carefully dug, found the bottle, but when I held it in my hands, a strange feeling of guilt came over me. It was as if I were invading something very intimate, violating his trust. I put the bottle back in place without opening it and replanted the basil, promising myself to respect his space. "Every couple has their secrets," my mother said once when I vaguely commented on Edward's oddities. "If he's good to you and the children, don't meddle where you're not called." It was typical advice for that time. Women shouldn't question their husbands too much, especially when family life seemed stable. The years passed peacefully. Richard grew strong and intelligent, already showing an aptitude for numbers, like his father. Laura, our youngest, was curious and talkative. She loved accompanying me to the school where I taught. Our life followed the expected course for a middle-class family in small-town America in the 1970s. It was only in 1972, when we had been married for 6 years, that I began to notice subtle changes in Edward's behavior. His business trips became more frequent and longer. When he returned, he seemed distant, worried. The bottle ritual continued religiously, but now he took even more care that I didn't hear him preparing them. I clearly remember a night when the phone rang during dinner. Edward answered, and his face changed instantly. He spoke only in monosyllables, stepped into the hallway, and continued the conversation in a low voice. When he returned, he said he needed to travel the next day, an emergency with an important client. It was the first time I doubted his words. There was something in his eyes, a tension that didn't match a simple business trip. During that trip, which lasted almost a week, Richard fell ill with a high fever. I tried to contact Edward at the hotel where he said he would be, but they informed me that no guest with his name had registered. When he finally returned and I confronted him about this, his explanation was quick. There was a change of plans. I stayed at a client's house. "I didn't want to worry you with details." Again, I accepted the explanation, although a small seed of doubt had been planted. Life continued. Edward resumed his routine as an attentive husband, and I convinced myself that my suspicions were unfounded. The years 1973 and 1974 brought more responsibilities for me at school. I was promoted to elementary coordinator, which meant more work, but also a better salary. Edward seemed proud of my professional achievements, always encouraging me. This made me push away any negative thoughts about our marriage. It was only in mid-1974, almost 8 years into our marriage, that the first truly disturbing sign appeared. I was organizing Edward's closet, putting away freshly ironed shirts, when I found a note written on perfumed paper in the pocket of a suit jacket. "I miss you. Thursday, same time. With love, I." My heart raced. The handwriting was clearly feminine, elegant. Isabel? Irene? Ivy? My hands trembled as I reread the note, trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps a female colleague, a client, someone with whom he maintained strictly professional relations. That night I didn't sleep. When Edward arrived late, as had become usual, I thought about confronting him, showing him the note, demanding explanations. But looking at the rooms where Richard and Laura slept peacefully, I didn't have the courage. What would happen to us if my suspicions were confirmed? How would I care for the children alone? Divorce was rare at the time, almost a scandal, especially in our small town. And then there was the financial question. My teacher's salary, even with the promotion, wouldn't be enough to support 2 children. I decided to observe, wait, gather more information before taking any action. I started paying attention to small details I had previously ignored, the different perfume on his shirts, the phone calls he answered and quickly hung up when I entered the room, the receipts from restaurants in cities where he was supposedly working, and of course, the bottles continued to be buried religiously with each full moon. Now I wondered what secrets they really contained. Were they just innocent superstitions, as he had always claimed? Or was there something darker related to that mysterious I and the lies I now suspected he was telling? Weeks after finding the note, I made a decision I never imagined myself capable of. On a Thursday, when Edward said he had an important meeting downtown, I decided to follow him. I asked my sister Martha to stay with the children after school. I have a meeting with parents. It might take a while, I lied. I wore a simple dress he rarely saw me in. I put on a scarf and sunglasses, a basic disguise, but one I thought sufficient. I asked Junior, the neighbor's son who had just bought a taxi, to take me. I need you to take me downtown and drop me off near the main square, I explained. It's a surprise I'm preparing for my husband. Junior nodded without asking questions. I positioned myself strategically in a cafe with a view of the bus stop where I knew Edward would get off. My heart was racing. I had never done anything like this before. I felt like a criminal, invading my own husband's privacy. But something inside me, perhaps instinct, perhaps just the pain of suspicion, told me I needed to know the truth. I saw when he got off the bus, elegant as always in his gray suit. Instead of heading to the commercial district where the offices were, he walked for about 15 minutes until he reached a residential building on a quiet street. He entered, greeting the doorman with familiarity, like someone who frequented the place regularly. I stayed across the street, hidden behind a newsstand, watching. The wait was endless. For almost 3 hours, I alternated between walking around the block and returning to my observation post, afraid of losing sight of him. I thought about my children, our house, everything I believed I had built. Was it really possible that our entire life was based on lies? When Edward finally came out, late in the afternoon, he wasn't alone. An elegant woman accompanied him to the door of the building. Dark hair, pulled back in a sophisticated bun, fine dress, the posture of someone accustomed to refined environments. They talked briefly, maintaining a respectful distance, obviously careful not to draw attention, but their gazes. There was no way not to notice the intimacy between them. I saw when she discreetly adjusted his tie before they said goodbye. There was no kiss, not even a hug, but that gesture told me everything I needed to know. I returned home before him, devastated, but also strangely calm. A part of me had known for a long time. I thanked my sister, bathed the children, prepared dinner as on any other day. When Edward arrived telling stories about his productive meeting, I observed his face, looking for traces of the lie. How did he manage to do this so naturally? That night, as he slept, I stood looking out the window at the backyard. The moon was almost full. In a few days, he would perform his ritual again, burying another bottle with his secrets. How many lies were buried in our own backyard, under the plants I tended daily? The following months were the most difficult of my life until then. I lived in a constant state of vigilance, seeking more proof, more confirmation of what I already knew in my heart. At the same time, I maintained the appearance of normality for the children, for my colleagues at school, for our neighbors and friends. I smiled at birthday parties, cooked Edward's favorite dishes, continued being the exemplary wife and mother everyone expected me to be. And he continued burying his bottles with each full moon, now with even more secrets to hide. After discovering Edward with that elegant woman, something changed inside me. It was as if a veil had been torn, revealing a reality that had always been there but that I refused to see. The year 1974 dragged on like a slow, silent storm in our marriage. Externally, everything seemed normal. Internally, I was drowning in doubts. I started creating a secret diary hidden inside the cover of an old cookbook. There, I noted each inconsistency in Edward's stories, each night he came home late, each suspicious phone call. I developed the habit of discreetly checking his pockets before washing clothes, looking for notes, receipts, any clue about his parallel life. I felt dirty doing this, like an invader in my own home, but the need to know the truth was stronger than my shame. On an afternoon in December 1974, I found something even more disturbing. Edward had left his briefcase at home when he rushed out for an urgent meeting. I fought against the urge to open it for almost 2 hours. A wife shouldn't do this, I repeated to myself, hearing my mother's voice in my head. But finally, I gave in. Inside the briefcase, among apparently normal work documents, I found a business card with the name Anthony Smith and Edward's photo. The listed company, International Importers, I had never heard of. There was also a small notebook with notes about values, names, and dates. On the last page, something that froze my blood. Thursday, 3 p.m., confirmed transfer. Thursday, 3 p.m. Exactly the time and day when I had followed him to that residential building. And the same initial from the perfumed note. Isabel, perhaps? I couldn't fully understand what those notes meant, but something told me it went far beyond a simple marital infidelity. I returned everything exactly as I had found it. That night, when Edward arrived, I observed him with new eyes. Who was this man with whom I had shared a bed for nearly 9 years? The father of my children, the respected sales representative, the husband who buried mysterious bottles on full moon nights. Was it all an elaborate lie? Christmas 1974 was particularly painful. Sitting at the dinner table, watching Edward distribute presents to Richard and Laura, smiling and playing with them, it seemed impossible that this same man was leading a double life. At times I doubted my own suspicions. Perhaps I was imagining things. Perhaps the stress of work at school was making me create absurd fantasies. But then, on the first full moon of 1975, I observed the bottle ritual again. This time I noticed something different. Edward seemed more tense, more hurried, and the bottle he buried was larger than usual. The next day he announced a 2-week trip, the longest he had ever made. It's an important opportunity, darling. It could define our future. During his absence, I spent sleepless nights, divided between the anguish of suspicion and the fear of what I might discover if I continued investigating. Richard, then 8 years old, noticed my concern. "Is Mom sad because Dad traveled?" he asked one night, when I found him observing me from the bedroom door instead of being asleep. "I'm just tired, my love. The school, the house, there are many responsibilities. When I grow up, I'll help take care of you and Laura," he replied with that touching seriousness of children. I hugged my son, holding back tears. Whatever the truth about Edward, our children didn't deserve to have their childhood tainted by my marital problems. When Edward returned from that trip, he brought expensive presents for everyone. A watch for me, imported toys for the children. He seemed more animated than normal, talking about promising new business and even suggesting a renovation of the house. "I'm thinking of building another room, maybe an office for me. What do you think?" The idea seemed strange to me. He had never before shown interest in working at home. In fact, he always made a point of keeping his professional life completely separate from home. Why this sudden change? In the following months, I noticed an increase in the calls he received at home. He always answered quickly and took the phone to the backyard or the bathroom, speaking in a low voice. Sometimes I heard him arguing, although he tried to hide it when I approached. In June 1975, Richard turned 8. We organized a small party at home with schoolmates and some neighbors. It was during this celebration that I had another disturbing glimpse into Edward's other life. One of the parents, Mr. Oliveira, who worked at the town's bank, struck up a conversation with him during the party. I was serving sodas, when I overheard a snippet of the conversation. "So, you're Edward, funny. I could swear I saw you at the bank last week, but the name on the document was different." Edward's face tensed for a second, but he quickly regained his composure, smiling cordially. "I have one of those common faces. Everyone says they've seen me somewhere. Must have been someone who looks like me." He skillfully changed the subject, asking about Mr. Oliveira's football team, but that brief exchange kept hammering in my mind. Another confirmation of my suspicions, or just a coincidence. At the end of that month, we had our first major argument in years. I discovered that Edward had opened a bank account in another town without my knowledge. I found the statement by chance when looking for a document in the car. "Why hide this from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm so the children playing in the backyard wouldn't notice. "I didn't hide anything. It's just an account for work expenses, more convenient when I'm traveling," he replied, with that tranquil confidence that always disarmed me. "You know how I hate mixing family finances with work finances." "And why did you never mention it? We've been married for almost 10 years, Edward. There shouldn't be secrets between us." He sighed, running his hand through his hair, a gesture he made when impatient. "You're making a tempest in a teacup, Evelyn. They're just practical work matters. Nothing that should worry you. Like the woman you meet on Thursdays." The words escaped before I could contain them. His face paled for an instant, but quickly regained color. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you, Edward, at that residential building with that elegant woman. Who is she, Isabel?" It was as if a mask had briefly fallen. His eyes hardened, and for a second, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Then, as quickly as it appeared, that expression gave way to the Edward of always, calm, controlled, slightly amused. "You followed me?" "I'm surprised, Evelyn. I never imagined you were the type of wife who spies on her husband." His voice had a tone of disappointment that made me feel guilty, as if I were the one in the wrong. "That woman is the widow of an important client. I'm helping organize the deceased's business affairs. I thought you trusted me." I wanted to believe him. God knows how I wanted to. But something in his eyes, something in the way he looked away when talking about the widow, told me he was lying. Still, I had no concrete proof, just suspicions and coincidences. "I trust you," I lied. "I'm just worried. You've been so distant, so many trips, so many meetings." He hugged me, kissing my forehead as he did when we were dating. "I'm working hard for our future, for our children. Soon, everything will make sense. I promise." That conversation resolved nothing, just pushed our issues under the rug, as we had done for years. We continued our apparently normal life, me teaching, taking care of the children. Him traveling more and more, maintaining his bottle ritual with each full moon. In August 1975, Edward announced a particularly long trip, almost 3 weeks. He said he was going to the South to visit important clients. On the eve of his departure, I observed him preparing an especially large bottle. This time, besides the usual papers, I saw when he put a considerable wad of cash inside. "Must be a very powerful ritual," I commented, trying to sound casual when I caught him sealing the bottle with wax. He startled, not having heard me enter the room. "The most important one so far," he replied, quickly recovering. "Our future depends on it." That night of the full moon, after burying the bottle under a freshly planted rosemary bush, Edward was especially affectionate. We made love as we hadn't in months, with an almost desperate intensity. Afterward, as he slept, I stayed awake, looking at his relaxed face, trying to see in it the man I fell in love with and not the stranger he had become. During his trip, a growing restlessness took hold of me. His words echoed in my mind. The most important so far, our future depends on it. What did that mean? What future was he planning? And why that persistent feeling that something big was about to happen? Richard and Laura missed their father, asking daily when he would return. I kept the routine as normal as possible. School, family lunches, Sundays with my mother and sister, reading sessions before bed. Externally, I was the same Evelyn as always. Internally, a storm was brewing. In the second week of Edward's trip, I received a strange call. A male voice I didn't recognize asked for Mr. Smith. "There's no Mr. Smith at this number," I replied, confused. "Sorry, ma'am, I must have written it down wrong. Mr. Smith gave me this phone number for urgent contact." Before I could question further, the man hung up. Mr. Smith, the same name I saw on the business card in Edward's briefcase. Was it a coincidence, or another piece of the puzzle that was my husband's double life? When Edward finally returned in early September 1975, he seemed different, lighter, almost euphoric, but with a touch of nervousness that didn't match his usual confidence. He brought extravagant gifts, a pearl necklace for me that certainly cost more than we could afford, a set of imported encyclopedias for Richard, a very expensive porcelain doll for Laura. "Where did all this money come from, Edward?" I asked when we were alone. "I closed an important deal, the biggest of my career," he replied, smiling. "Soon I won't need to travel so much. I'll be able to spend more time with you." There was something in his tone, an urgency I didn't understand at the time, as if he were trying to convince me, or perhaps himself. In the following weeks, Edward spent more time at home than usual. He played with the children, helped with school assignments, even offered to cook a few times, something he had never done before. He seemed to be saying goodbye, though I didn't realize it at the time. One night in October, while washing the dinner dishes, the phone rang. Edward answered, and his expression changed instantly. He spoke only in monosyllables, looking at me nervously. When he hung up, he announced he needed to travel again urgently. "But you just got back. You promised to spend more time with us," I protested. "It's the last time, Evelyn. After this trip, everything will be different, I promise." Something in the way he said that gave me chills. There was a finality in his words that I couldn't decipher at that moment. We argued like never before, with me accusing him of neglecting the family, him insisting he was doing everything for us. It was our first, really serious argument, with harsh words from both sides. The next morning, he left early, still tense from the previous night's argument. He kissed the children with unusual affection, lingering in the embrace. For me, just a quick and formal kiss. "I'll be back in 3 days, at most." That was the last time I saw Edward alive. That October afternoon in 1975, the phone rang at 4:37 p.m., a time that was etched in my memory as if branded with iron. I was correcting my students' tests at the kitchen table while Richard did his homework and Laura colored a drawing on the living room floor. An ordinary day that in a second would transform into the dividing mark of my life. "Mrs. Evelyn Wilson?" asked an unfamiliar male voice. "Yes, that's me. This is Dr. Paul Mendez from County Hospital." He made a pause so heavy that I felt my stomach sink, even before he continued. "I regret to inform you that your husband, Edward Wilson, was admitted to our emergency room about an hour ago with acute myocardial infarction." My ears started ringing. The following words came as if through a tunnel. "Resuscitation attempts. Unfortunately, he didn't survive. We're very sorry for your loss." "There must be some mistake," I heard my own voice say as if from far away. "My husband is on a business trip in Chicago." "Ma'am, he was found in a meeting room at the Central Hotel here in town. He had his documents confirming his identity. We need you to come to the hospital for the necessary procedures." I remember looking at my children, unaware of the tragedy that had just befallen us, and thinking, how am I going to tell them? The room was spinning, and for a moment I thought I would faint, but I couldn't. Now it was just me. Just me to take care of everything. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I replied, with a calm I didn't know I possessed. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Carmen, asking her to stay with the children without going into details. I just said it was a family emergency. I changed clothes mechanically, like an automaton. The procedures were a blur of bureaucracy and pain, identifying the body. Edward looked strangely at peace, as if just sleeping, signing documents, arrangements for the wake, calls to family, all done with a kind of emotional detachment, as if it were happening to someone else. The doctor explained it had been a sudden heart attack, probably caused by severe stress or some undiagnosed heart condition. Edward was only 45, apparently healthy. "Sometimes it happens like this, without warning," said the doctor, with that professional compassion that brings no comfort. But what intrigued me, and I would only process completely days later, was what the hotel manager told me when I went to collect Edward's belongings. "Your husband was in a meeting with a lady. She was the one who called the ambulance when he fell ill." "A lady?" I asked, feeling that familiar pang of suspicion now mixed with recent grief. "Yes, I didn't get her name." "She was very shaken. She left quickly after the ambulance arrived. Edward wasn't in Chicago. He was in our own town, having a meeting with a mysterious woman in a hotel room. Not even in death could he be honest with me." The wake was held at the Municipal Cemetery Chapel. Few were present. Some of Edward's colleagues I barely knew, neighbors, close family members, my school colleagues. Sitting next to the coffin, with Richard and Laura clinging to me like anchors in the storm, I observed every face that came to offer condolences. That's when I saw her. The same elegant woman I had caught with Edward months earlier. She was at the chapel door, discreetly dressed in black, observing from a distance. Our gazes crossed for an instant. She didn't approach, didn't sign the guest book, didn't speak to anyone. She simply remained there for a few minutes and then disappeared like an apparition. At that moment, amid the searing pain of loss and with my children in my arms, I had no emotional space to process that presence. I just registered it, filing it in the back of my mind as another mystery to be unraveled when I had the strength. The days following the burial were an exercise in survival. Waking up, preparing the children for school, showing up to work with a forced smile, responding to kind but invasive questions. "How are you coping? Are the children okay? Is anyone helping you?" It was only a week after the funeral, when I finally sat down to organize Edward's documents, that the true dimension of my problems was revealed. The house where we lived, which I thought was ours, was mortgaged. There were outstanding loans in his name that I knew nothing about. The life insurance he had mentioned several times simply didn't exist. "Your husband withdrew a considerable sum from the joint account 3 weeks ago," informed the bank manager with poorly disguised embarrassment. "I'm sorry, but the current balance barely covers the funeral expenses." Sitting in the living room armchair that night, after the children had fallen asleep exhausted from crying so much for their father, I faced the cruel reality. I was alone, with 2 small children to raise, about to lose our house, with debts I couldn't pay on my teacher's salary. That's when my gaze fell on the backyard, visible through the living room window. The full moon illuminated the garden, highlighting the small plants that marked each spot where Edward had buried his mysterious bottles over the years. That strange ritual I accepted without question as part of the particular mythology of our marriage. An idea began to form in my mind. What if those bottles didn't contain just prosperity rituals? What if they held something more tangible, something that could explain Edward's double life, or perhaps even help in our desperate situation? For days, the idea fermented in my mind. It seemed disrespectful, almost profane, to dig up what he had so carefully hidden, as if it were a posthumous violation of his trust. But what trust was there to preserve in a marriage built on lies? One night, exactly a month after his death, I made my decision. Richard and Laura were sleeping soundly, exhausted after a particularly difficult day at school where other children had asked insensitive questions about their father's absence. I put on an old robe over my nightgown, slipped on my gardening boots, and took the small spade I used to tend the plants. The full moon, the same moon that had witnessed Edward's secret ritual for so many years, now illuminated my own journey to the Garden of Secrets. I chose to start with the rue plant, the oldest one that marked the first bottle I had seen Edward bury in 1968. My hands trembled as I dug, partly from the physical effort I wasn't accustomed to, partly from fear of what I might find. The sound of the spade hitting glass startled me. I carefully excavated around it until I managed to remove the intact bottle. It was an old red wine bottle, sealed with red wax. I sat right there on the damp garden ground and broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside, protected by a carefully sealed plastic bag, I found documents and money. The first document I saw took my breath away. An ID card with Edward's photo, but another name, Anthony Smith, the same Mr. Smith from the strange phone call I received during his last trip. Different date of birth, different parentage, everything different. Along with the false identity, there was a considerable amount of cash, much more than Edward could honestly earn in months of work, and a handwritten note, emergency fund, in case I need to disappear quickly. I ran inside the house, locking all the doors, as if fearing Edward's ghost might surprise me rummaging through his secrets. I spread the contents on the kitchen table, examining each item under the yellowish lamplight. Besides the false identity and money, there were detailed notes about a company called Santos Importers and its owners. Addresses, routines, banking information, the kind of thing only a private investigator or someone with criminal intentions would collect. I didn't sleep that night. 1,000 questions whirled in my mind. Who was the man I had married? What did those documents mean? Why would he need a false identity? And most importantly, what would I do with that discovery? The next morning, after sending the children to school with forced smiles and carefully prepared lunches, I returned to the backyard. This time, I chose the basil plant that marked another of the oldest bottles. The second revelation was even more disturbing. This bottle contained more money, notes of different denominations, apparently used and impossible to trace, and a notebook with detailed notes about a scam carried out in 1967, shortly after our wedding. An elaborate scheme involving the sale of non-existent land to foreign investors. Among the notes were names of accomplices, amounts received, and the most painful part, a handwritten timeline where Edward had planned each step, including marriage to E, necessary appearance of stability. My stomach twisted reading that. Our marriage, planned as part of a scam, the date matched. He met me a few months before executing that scheme. He needed a respectable wife, a teacher with a good reputation in town, to create the image of a family man. I ran to the bathroom and vomited, the reality finally hitting me with full force. When I recovered, looking at my pale face in the mirror, something inside me changed. The sadness and grief gave way to a cold, almost clinical determination. I needed to know everything, every detail of the life of the man I thought I knew. Not out of revenge or bitterness, but out of practical necessity. If I wanted to protect my children and find a way out of that desperate situation, I needed to understand exactly what I was facing. During the following weeks, I transformed the search for bottles into my secret mission. Each day, after the children went to school, I would dig up 1 or 2 bottles, methodically cataloging their contents. At night, after Richard and Laura were asleep, I analyzed the documents, trying to piece together the puzzle that was my late husband's double life. The bank began pressuring me about the mortgage. I received collection notices for unpaid loans. My salary barely covered the basic expenses of the month. Time was running out, and I needed to make difficult decisions. Sell the house, move with the children to a smaller place, ask my family for help, assuming the shame of revealing the situation. It was in this atmosphere of growing desperation that I dug up the bottle under the rosemary plant, the last one Edward had buried a few days before his death. The contents of that bottle would change everything. Inside was the largest amount of money yet, a package of high-denomination bills carefully wrapped in plastic. But the most surprising were the documents, a detailed plan to leave the country. Ship tickets to Uruguay, in the names of Anthony Smith and Isabel Montero. Reservations at a hotel in Montevideo. And the most shocking, documents for transferring a substantial amount to a Uruguayan bank dated 3 weeks after his death. Exactly the period when he said everything would be different. With these papers was a letter addressed to Isabel, my true love. In the 4 handwritten pages, Edward, or Anthony, I didn't even know who he really was anymore, detailed how he had prepared everything for them to start a new life together, far from the complications of America. He spoke about the scams they had carried out together over the years, about how she had been his ideal partner, both in business and in life. And then the phrase that hit me like a slap: finally free from all ties, including my facade marriage, which served its purpose well. Sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by evidence of the most complete betrayal one can imagine, I didn't cry. I had already shed too many tears for a man who never existed. Instead, I felt a strange calm take over me. The truth, however painful, brought with it a liberating clarity. Edward was planning to abandon us. Everything was already prepared: the escape, the money, the new identity. The heart attack that killed him in that hotel room, probably during a final meeting with Isabel to settle the last details, was the only unplanned event in his meticulous scheme. And now, by an irony of fate, the resources he had accumulated for his escape with his lover were in my hands. The money that would have paid for his new life could save mine and my children's. That night, looking at the starry sky through the kitchen window, I made my decision. I would use the money from the bottles to pay off the debts, save our house, ensure Richard and Laura's education, not out of revenge, but out of survival, out of poetic justice. But the moral dilemma haunted me. That money was the product of scams, fraudulent schemes that had certainly harmed innocent people. Using it wouldn't make me an accomplice, even if belatedly, to Edward's crimes. On the other hand, what would happen to my children if I refused that unexpected resource? We would lose our house, face severe financial difficulties, perhaps even hunger. What choice did I really have? While struggling with these questions, I continued digging up the remaining bottles. Each one revealed more details of Edward's secret life: elaborate schemes, multiple false identities, records of scams carried out in different cities, lists of victims with extorted amounts, and invariably in each bottle, some mention of I or Isabel, the woman who, I discovered, had been his partner since long before he met me, the woman he intended to flee with, abandoning the family he had used only as a convenient disguise. The question hammering in my mind was, what did Isabel know about me, about Richard and Laura? Had she ever visited our house, observed our routine, laughed at my ignorance? The idea tormented me, increasing the feeling of having lived a lie for almost 10 years. 2 weeks after starting my excavations, having dug up almost half of the bottles scattered throughout the backyard, I made a decision that would change the course of my life forever. After sleepless nights and internal debates, I made my decision in the early morning hours of November 1975. The clock read 3:17 when I placed the last sheet of paper in the fireplace, watching the records of Edward's scams turn to ashes. I kept only the documents proving his dual identity and the letters to Isabel, not as a form of emotional torture, but as reminders of what I would never again allow in my life: illusions. That morning, I visited a bank, not our usual bank where Edward was known, but another in a neighboring town. I opened an account in my name with part of the money found in the bottles. The amount was enough to pay off the mortgage and pending loans, with a reserve that would guarantee the children's education and our survival for the next few years, if carefully managed. Inheritance from a distant aunt, I explained to the curious manager about the origin of that amount in cash. He didn't question beyond what was necessary. A recent widow with 2 small children doesn't arouse suspicion. Back in our town, I used the money to settle all the debts left by Edward. With each check I issued, each receipt I signed, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. That money had been obtained by deceiving people who might be going through difficulties because of Edward and Isabel's scams. But it was also the only thing that would prevent my children from losing the roof over their heads. To balance this moral scale, I made another crucial decision. With the documents I found in the bottles, I identified some of Edward's most recent victims. Through anonymous letters, I sent alerts about the fraudulent schemes they had participated in, allowing them to at least protect themselves from future harm. For 2 particularly harmed families, whom I discovered were on the verge of ruin because of investments made with Anthony Smith, I discreetly sent part of the money, disguised as an investment refund. It wasn't perfect. It didn't undo all the harm caused, but it was what was within my reach without compromising my children's future. A small, partial redemption for Edward's legacy. With the most urgent financial issues resolved, I turned my attention to the future. I couldn't continue just as a teacher. The salary wouldn't be enough in the long term, especially considering that the reserve money from the bottles, although substantial, wouldn't last forever. In December 1975, I visited a small commercial property for sale near the school where I taught. It was a modest shop, previously a shoe store that had closed when the owner retired. The location was perfect, central enough to attract customers, small enough to be managed by one person, and just a few minutes' walk from our house. On January 15, 1976, I inaugurated the New Path Bookstore, a name that for others was just commercial, but for me symbolized much more. With shelves full of notebooks, pencils, pens, and all kinds of school supplies, plus a small section of children's and educational books, the business was modest but promising. In the first weeks, I managed the bookstore after my teaching hours, hiring a young student to attend during mornings. It was exhausting, waking up at 5 a.m., preparing the children for school, teaching until noon, having a quick lunch, going to the shop until 7 p.m., returning home, preparing dinner, helping with homework, and finally falling into bed around 11 p.m. But there was something liberating about that exhaustion. For the first time, I felt I was building something truly mine, something no one could take away from me with lies or betrayals. The children also seemed to respond positively to the new routine. Richard, in particular, loved helping at the shop on Saturdays, organizing merchandise and eventually attending to simpler customers. "Mom is a businesswoman now, like Dad was," he commented once with innocent pride. The comparison hurt, but I smiled anyway. He didn't need to know the truth. Not yet, perhaps never. Months turned into years. The bookstore prospered modestly, allowing me to gradually reduce my hours as a teacher until finally resigning in 1978, dedicating myself entirely to the business. We expanded, adding a section of adult books that became popular in the small town, lacking bookstores. In 1979, 4 years after Edward's death, I received an unexpected visit at the shop. It was almost closing time when an elegant woman entered. Dark hair with some silver strands, discreet but expensive clothes, impeccable posture. I recognized her immediately, although we had never been formally introduced. Isabel. "Good afternoon," she said, with a soft, educated voice that didn't match the image I had created of her in my mind. "I think we don't need introductions." My heart raced, but I maintained my composure. The shop was empty except for the two of us. I locked the door, turned the sign to closed, and invited her to the back, where I kept a small area with a table and chairs for my administrative work. "Why are you here?" I asked bluntly when we sat down. "Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe for some kind of closure," she replied, looking around with genuine interest. "You've built something good here." "What do you really want?" I insisted, little interested in compliments from someone who had helped destroy my life. Isabel sighed, all the elegance not hiding the tiredness in her eyes. "Believe it or not, I came to warn you, and perhaps apologize, although I know that means nothing." She told me she had been approached by Edward's former associates, people who suspected he had hidden money before dying, dangerous people who now believed I might have access to that money. I told them you knew nothing, that Edward never shared business details with his wife, but I don't know if they believed me. The information chilled me. I thought of the children, of the relatively peaceful life we had built over the last few years. The idea of criminals believing I possessed something that belonged to them was terrifying. "Why would you help me?" I asked, still suspicious. Isabel hesitated, looking at her well-cared-for hands. "Because I was also deceived. Not in the same way as you, of course. I knew who he was. I participated in many of the schemes, but in the end, he was planning to abandon me too." She told me how she had discovered, shortly before Edward's death, that he had diverted a large part of the money they had accumulated together, preparing to flee alone. The apartment he had bought for her was in a false name and would be sold. The investments made in her name didn't exist. I confronted him that day at the hotel. It was during our argument that he had the heart attack. Her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. I called the ambulance, but I knew it was too late. I fled before they asked questions. We remained silent for a few moments. Two women united only by the betrayal of the same man. We weren't friends. We would never be. But there was a mutual understanding that transcended the circumstances. What should I do about these associates? I finally asked. I've already partially taken care of it. I said I would investigate, that I would try to find out if you had access to anything. That bought time. She handed me a small piece of paper with a name and phone number. This man is reliable, works with private security. If you notice anything suspicious, anything at all, contact him immediately. Before leaving, Isabel paused at the door. You've built an honest life with that money. At least it served something good in the end. It wasn't exactly a request for forgiveness, but there was a certain redemption in her words. I never needed to use the contact she gave me. Perhaps Edward's associates believed I really didn't know anything. Or perhaps Isabel did more to protect me than she revealed. Either way, that unexpected visit was the last time I had any contact with the obscure world that Edward had inhabited. The 1980s brought new challenges and opportunities. Richard, now a teenager, showed an aptitude for business, helping more and more with the bookstore's administration. Laura, more introspective, developed a passion for reading and later for law. Ironically, she talked about specializing in criminal law to combat people who deceive others. In 1983, with the business thriving, I made a bold decision to transform the bookstore into a true bookshop. We renovated the space, expanded the collection, created a small cafe in the back where customers could read excerpts before buying. The New Path Bookshop became a cultural meeting point in town, eventually hosting small literary events and reading circles. It was during this period that I faced one of the most difficult moments as a mother. Richard, then 16, found by chance the box where I kept the few documents I preserved about Edward's double life. He was in the attic, looking for Christmas decorations, when he came across those concrete proofs that his father wasn't who he thought. He came home pale, confronting me with the letters and false IDs. Is it true? Was Dad a criminal? For years, I had maintained the image of Edward as a good father and husband, who unfortunately died young. I invented stories about family moments that never happened. I preserved photographs. I kept alive the memory of a man who never existed. It was what I thought best for the children to grow up believing in a positive legacy, not marked by the sordid truth. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, I told Richard an edited version of the truth. Yes, his father had another side he kept hidden from the family. Yes, he had done wrong things, but he also had qualities. I didn't mention the planned abandonment, nor the fact that our entire marriage was part of a scheme. Some truths are too heavy to share, even with almost adult children. Richard spent days processing that revelation, alternating between anger, sadness, and confusion. Eventually, he surprised me with his maturity. What matters is what you did, Mom. How you transformed something bad into something good for us. For Laura, we decided to keep the softer version of the story. Edward had problems, made mistakes, but loved them in his way. She was only 13, still too young to handle the complete truth. Richard agreed to keep his sister's secret, creating between us a special bond of complicity and understanding. In 1985, 10 years after Edward's death, life had taken a completely different turn from what I had ever imagined. The bookshop was thriving, now with a branch in the neighboring town, managed by a trusted employee. Richard, about to enter business school, already showed natural talent for business. Laura, still in high school, dreamed of law school, and I, at 46, was a different woman from that naive teacher who accepted without question her husband's stories. Stronger, wiser, more independent. I still carried scars, of course, wounds that never completely heal, but they were no longer open and painful. They had transformed into marks of a battle won. That year I did something I had postponed for a decade. I completely renovated the backyard. I hired gardeners, pulled up all the old plants, each marking the location of a buried bottle, each reminding me of a lie. In their place, we created a completely new space, a small garden with a bench, a pergola, and seasonal flowers. A place of peace, no longer of secrets. During the renovation, we found the last bottles I had never dug up. The confused gardeners brought me those strange objects that emerged from the soil. Just old trash, I explained, discreetly taking the bottles. Later, alone, I opened the last messages from the past. They contained more money, which I anonymously donated to charities, and more documents that only confirmed what I already knew about the man I had married. The last bottle, however, contained something different, a letter addressed to me, dated 1972, 7 years into our marriage, 3 years before his death. Written in a moment of apparent lucidity or remorse, Edward confessed that, although our marriage had begun as part of his plans, he had developed genuine affection for me and the children. "I live between two worlds, Evelyn," he had written. "One of lies I can't abandon, and another of simple truths I don't deserve. Maybe one day I'll find the courage to choose the right path, but I fear it's too late." I don't know if I believed those words. Perhaps they were just another manipulation, another attempt to have a plan B in case his schemes failed. Or perhaps there was a spark of humanity in that complex man, a brief window into a soul capable of recognizing the value of what he was sacrificing in the name of his greed. Either way, I burned the letter along with the other documents. The past was finally buried, not in secret bottles, but in the ashes of a life that no longer existed. The future, my children's future, would be built not on buried lies, but on the simple truth I learned the hard way. We are defined not by what happens to us, but by what we do with it. And what I did was transform Edward's bottles of lies into seeds of a new, honest, and finally truly mine life. The years following the backyard renovation were ones of flowering, not just of the new plants that replaced the marks of Edward's secrets, but of our family and the business I built with my own hands. Looking back now at 86, I realized that renovation perfectly symbolized the transition we made, transforming soil contaminated by lies into a garden of possibilities. In 1986, Richard entered business school in the city. It was hard to see him leave, but at the same time, I felt an indescribable pride. My son, who had so often helped in the bookstore after school, was now following his own path. Laura, at 16, remained determined to study law, spending hours in the bookshop's legal section, devouring books far above her age. The New Path network grew slowly, but with solid foundations. After the success of the branch in the neighboring town, we opened a third store in 1988, this time focused exclusively on children's books and educational material. We called it Little Paths, and it quickly became a reference for teachers and parents in the region. I worked many hours, it's true, but there was a profound satisfaction in building something legitimate, something that helped the community while supporting my family. Each new customer who left happy with a book, each teacher who found material for their classes, each child who discovered the pleasure of reading in our shelves, they were small victories against the obscure legacy Edward had tried to leave us. In 1990, I turned 51 and completed a decade and a half as a widow and businesswoman. On a quiet Saturday, while organizing a new shipment of books, I heard the doorbell. I looked up and froze momentarily. It was Isabel, the second time we met in 11 years. "Your business prospered," she commented, looking around with genuine admiration. She looked older, naturally, but still maintained that elegance that characterized her. "We need to talk, if you have a moment." I took her to the small office in the back, as I had done years before. This time, however, the meeting had a different purpose. Isabel was sick, aggressive cancer with a reserved prognosis. I didn't come seeking sympathy, she clarified, noticing my expression. I came because there's something you deserve to know before it's too late. She told me how after Edward's death, she had tried to start over far from there. She used her skills and part of the money she managed to recover to open a small art gallery in New York. Legitimate art? No forgeries, she assured with an ironic smile. For years she lived discreetly, trying to build an honest life, just as I had. But the past always finds ways to catch up with us, she continued. 2 years ago, I was approached by a man who said he was Edward's son. Those words hit me like a physical blow. A son of Edward's? My mind immediately calculated. Would it be from before we met or during our marriage? He's 26 now. His name is Philip. He was born in 1964, before Edward knew either of us. The revelation brought a strange relief. A son from before, from a previous relationship, wasn't exactly a betrayal of our marriage, though it was yet another secret hidden from me. Isabel explained that the young man's mother had raised her son alone, never revealing the father's identity. Only on her deathbed did she tell the young man the truth, giving him some old letters and photographs. Philip, curious about his origins, spent years looking for clues about his father until finally locating Isabel through mutual acquaintances from the past. He doesn't know about Edward's business dealings. He believes his father was really a sales representative, and he doesn't know about you or your children. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, still processing the existence of a stepson I had never known. Because he deserves to know he has siblings, and your children deserve to know they have a half-brother. Not now, not immediately, but when you feel the time is right. She handed me an envelope. Here's his contact, some photographs. The decision to use this is entirely yours. I kept that envelope for months, undecided about what to do with that information. Richard was finishing college, about to take over the administration of the bookstore network. Laura had just entered law school. Revealing the existence of a half-brother would mean reopening the wounds of the past, bringing up questions about who their father really was. It was only in 1992, when Richard graduated and returned to work permanently in the family business, that I finally shared the secret with my children. I gathered them at home on an autumn Sunday and told them about Philip. You're adults now, capable of making your own decisions. If you want to meet him, I'll support you. If you prefer to keep your distance, I'll respect that too. To my surprise, both expressed immediate interest in meeting their half-brother. Perhaps the possibility of having an additional connection with the father they barely knew was too powerful to ignore. The first meeting happened on an extended holiday weekend when we arranged to meet in New York, neutral territory for everyone. Philip was strikingly similar to Edward. The same captivating smile, the same expressive gestures with his hands. But there was in him a sincerity and transparency that his father never truly possessed. I grew up dreaming of meeting my father, he told us during our lunch. When I finally discovered who he was and that he had died, I thought I would never have a paternal family. Finding you is like recovering a part of my history that I thought was lost forever. I observed my children interacting with this newly discovered brother, sharing stories, discovering similarities, laughing at inherited mannerisms. I saw at that moment that some good seeds can sprout even from the most contaminated soil. Philip didn't carry Edward's legacy of lies. He represented a possibility of redemption, a family connection that wasn't based on deception. In the following years, Philip gradually integrated into our family. He was a graphic designer and eventually began collaborating with our bookshops, creating promotional materials and renovating the visual identity of the network. Richard, who had taken over the business management, found in his older half-brother a creative ally and a friend. In 1995, I made the decision to partially step away from the administration of the bookshops. At 56, I felt it was time to give more space to the young people and find new purposes. Richard was doing an excellent job as director, wisely expanding the network, and Laura, freshly graduated in law, was beginning a promising career as a lawyer. Without completely leaving the business, I redirected my energies to a project I had dreamed of for years, a literacy and reading encouragement program for adults. Using a space at the back of the original bookstore, I began offering free classes to local company employees, domestic workers, laborers, people who had abandoned their studies too early and were now seeking a second chance. New Paths for Adults, I called the project. The name was no coincidence. We all deserve the opportunity to rewrite our history, to chart a new route when the previous one proves wrong or insufficient. It was during this period that I met Gerald, a retired professor who volunteered to help with the program. Widowed for 5 years, he brought with him a serenity and gentleness that immediately captivated me. We started as colleagues, then friends, and to my surprise, at 58, I found myself in love again. I never thought this would happen again, I confessed to him one night as we walked through the garden that had replaced the old field of buried bottles. Life always holds surprises. Sometimes good ones, he replied, holding my hand as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. We didn't officially marry, but we built a relationship based on mutual respect and absolute transparency. I told him the whole truth about Edward, about the bottles, about how I had rebuilt my life. Gerald listened without judgment, offering only understanding and admiration for the journey I had faced. "You transformed the poison into medicine," he said. I don't know many people with that strength. The turn of the millennium brought new challenges and joys. The bookstore network faced growing competition from large chains and later from online sales. Richard, always visionary, adapted the business, focusing on specific niches and the unique experience a local bookstore can offer. The New Path bookshops survived where many others failed, fewer in number after some consolidations, but stronger in purpose. Laura built a notable career as a lawyer, specializing precisely in cases of financial fraud and consumer protection. The irony of this choice never escaped me. Without knowing the whole truth about her father, she dedicated her professional life to combating exactly the type of crime he committed. "I've always felt a special indignation when I see people being deceived," she explained to me once. "As if it were personal, you know? As if I had a mission to prevent it from happening." Philip married in 2003, and I was invited to occupy the mother's place in the ceremony, an honor that deeply moved me. Seeing that young man who entered our lives so late accept me as a maternal figure was one of the great unexpected joys of my life. Gerald passed away in 2007 after a brief battle against lung cancer. Our decade together was a gift I never expected to receive, a relationship without shadows, without secrets, without bottles buried in the backyard. The pain of his departure was intense, but completely different from the traumatic confusion I felt with Edward's death. This time there was only genuine mourning, not contaminated by shocking discoveries or revealed betrayals. In the following years, I dedicated myself even more to the literacy program, which had grown and become an independent foundation, serving several towns in the region. I also had the joy of seeing the family grow. Richard and Laura married, and grandchildren began to arrive, bringing new life and purpose to my days. In 2015, at 76, I received an unexpected phone call. Isabel had passed away, and her lawyer was executing her last wishes, among them the delivery of a sealed box addressed to me. Inside the box, I found a detailed diary that Isabel had kept during the years she was with Edward, along with a letter explaining why she thought I should have it. "This record may bring pain, but also answers," she wrote. "I used it for my own healing, to understand how I allowed myself to be manipulated and how I participated in the manipulation of others. Perhaps it can bring you some kind of closure." I read the diary in small doses over months. It was like watching a movie about a parallel life that was happening while I lived my innocent routine as a teacher and mother. Isabel documented schemes, meetings, arguments, promises made and broken. There were occasional mentions of me, the wife, the perfect facade, sometimes with disdain, other times with a strange compassion. The final entry, dated a few days before Edward's death, revealed that Isabel had discovered his plans to flee alone, abandoning her just as he planned to abandon me. "He loves no one but himself," she wrote. "Perhaps he never loved. We are all just pieces on his board, disposable when no longer useful." I closed the diary, feeling not anger or bitterness, but a strange peace. Time had transformed those revelations into mere historical facts, important for understanding the past, but powerless to hurt the present. Today, at 86, sitting in this room while recording this video, I look back and see a life that took completely unexpected turns. From the young teacher who accepted without question the strange bottles buried by her husband to the businesswoman who built a bookstore network. From the betrayed and abandoned wife to the matriarch of an extended family that includes even a son whom Edward never knew. The backyard where so many secrets were buried is now a small oasis tended by my grandchildren when they visit me. The bottles that contained lies gave way to flowers that renew their beauty each season. And the woman who once trembled with fear of the uncertain future now smiles with the certainty that we are stronger and more resilient than we ever imagined. The bottles that Edward buried with each full moon hid his darkest secrets, but also, ironically, contained the seeds of my liberation. When I dug them up, I found not only betrayal and lies, but also the opportunity to rebuild everything, this time on true foundations. If there's a lesson I'd like to leave for you watching me, it's this. Our greatest tests can become our greatest transformations. What's buried in your backyard, literally or metaphorically, may be painful to dig up, but perhaps it's exactly what you need to face to really move forward. Thank you for listening to me today. If you like this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel, and please comment where you're watching from. Even at 86, I'm still moved to know that my words reach hearts across America. After all, it's never too late to unearth truths and plant new gardens.